Hey, thanks again for joining us. We're just so happy you would join us again here on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast, bringing you guests around the world. And this one, I had to go real far. I had to go a couple hours north on 57. Help me welcome, long time famed. I've known you for a long time. Don't roll your eyes, but help me welcome Mr. Jim Knoedel. Jim, how are you, sir?
Good. Had a great day. It's beautiful out here. I live right on Lake Michigan, and it's a beautiful sight right out my window.
This is like a perfect time for that, right? The leaves are changing. I mean, it is
Mm-hmm.
literally gorgeous, right? This is what postcards are made
It
of.
looks nice. Yeah, sailboats out there, everything.
Sailboats. Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. I live by a little Lake of the Woods, so I don't have sailboats.
Yeah,
I've got a lot of fishing trips with my kid though, man. He does the fishing. He wants to fish Lake Michigan next time we're up that way. So
yeah.
maybe we'll have to stop by the Knoedel residence and see, this is how I get myself invited to people's houses. I just say my kids want to go. That's the whole reason I started the podcast.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, excited for you to join us here today. You've got a really rich history of track and field with your different coaching stops. And, I've always known you as the Illinois guy and, UIC and stuff, but really some other interesting stops on your journey. Why don't we get started? Why don't you take us back where you kind of grew up and when did track become a thing for you and how did that get started?
Well, I'm originally from Iowa City, and I ended up going to school there. But when we grew up, I have three brothers, and we played sports all the time. We played basketball, football, baseball, track. I always remember, I went out for football as a freshman in seventh grader in junior high. And I got hit once, and that was the end of my career. I'm a good catcher, but I'm not a good absorber of punishment. I went out for basketball next year. I can't shoot. I went out the third year. I went out for baseball. I can catch, but I can't hit. I'm good defense, but no. So track became my sport. And I actually didn't start in track until my junior year of high school because we were from a family of seven. My dad was a fireman. We didn't have a lot of money, so I had to have a job all the time. So I remember I worked until I was through my sophomore year of high school. I always had a job. I worked when I was 14 even. Wow. And finally I said, that's it. I got to play sports because I don't want to say a natural runner, but we always did stuff like my mom said, run to the grocery store. You ran to the grocery store. If we had swim lessons, we had to bike to the city park to go swimming. So I was very aerobic. And I think naturally I discovered at a young age that I was a good runner. It wasn't anything I tried. It just was. Not that I was a great runner, but at the time I was good. So that's how I got involved in that. But my two younger brothers were actually collegiate athletes at Iowa. I competed at Iowa. My younger brother was a 7'4" high jumper, and my youngest brother was only a 6'10" high jumper.
Wow. What is your high jump PR?
5'8".
See, a 7, a 6, and a 5. That's perfect.
See, we were like, even though we were the same type of builds, we're from two halves of the family. I have a lot of endurance. I always had a lot of endurance. I never had much spring at all. We started like my next younger brother, Bill, he went to school at Iowa too. He, in high school, he was 6'3". He could out jump any center in the state, any center. He could hit his head to the rim. He could jump that high on a run, obviously, but he had good spring. But I didn't have any spring, and so the mile was a natural for me. But so we got, I got involved in sports not until not seriously, because when I was in junior high, they kept cutting me. So that was into that. I feel like Michael Jordan, but I never had that step up.
Yeah.
I just stayed there. But in track, I was good. Right away, I remember the first time I ran the 2 mile in high school, I set the school record. It wasn't very good. I'd be embarrassed to tell you right now, but at the time it was a school record. So
yeah,
I could tell that was a direction I could go. And so we started out in high school, and I had a good experience my junior year and my senior year, and did cross country and track. And I think until my senior year in high school, I never really thought about running in college, but I had a good enough career that I went as a walk-on in Iowa, and I had a great 4 years and enjoyed a lot. And it's one of those experiences that I always think to myself, probably one of the most profound decisions I ever made, because so often we just do things idly. And I think in a way, when I started running cross country, I thought, oh, this coach sucks. But it's, you realize there's something there that he sees something in me that I don't see in myself. And so I stuck with it and became better and better and better. But I've saved my high school training guide from, I was in high school from 67 to 70. Saved that. I still have all that stuff.
Wow.
And sometimes I think I was lazy. I don't think I did as much as I did. But when I look back at what I did, it's like, wow, when I was 17 years old, I was running 12 miles a day and stuff, things like that.
Yeah.
And this is back in, 68, 69. So it was a different time. And it was weird to be able to see how much I did. It was still a big step up. I think part of when I look back at my high school career, that was probably the impetus for some of my book that we may talk about. But it was a start to career. And I think I'd never been I enjoyed sports, but I was never a great athlete. And I think that's what I love about track and cross country.
Now, knowing you grew up there, was it always a given whether you were going to be a 9-minute 2-miler or a 19-minute 2-miler? By the way, that's more closer to my PR. Was it always a given you were going to go to Iowa? Was that kind of if you're going to go to school, if you're going to go to college, you're going to go to the University of Iowa?
Pretty much, because I grew up, in the era of, some of my classmates were sons of, and one daughter of football coaches. Tennis coach, all my classmates were involved in sport. Their parents were involved in sports. And so it was a natural to go there. And I didn't really look any other place. It was a time, like I said, I'm from a family of 7. And so just to go to college when you had parents that didn't go to college, it was a big deal. And I think it was practical at the time. It was, when you look back at how much you paid for tuition, I can remember this, I don't know why. It was $315 a semester, and there was no student fees. And if you spent $20 on books, you had a heart attack.
We just had Ron Alice on the podcast, and he told us a story, same kind of sort of time frame when he was at Long Beach State University. He got Dwight Stones to jump, and he came in just for the spring semester, so it was a 1 semester scholarship, and he said it was $900 for everything, because he said it was the best $900 he's ever invested. He got the a 7+ automatic Olympian. He was the national champ for him, of course, right off the bat. But I was, while $900 was a great investment, I kept thinking, holy cow, $900 for everything. You can't get your books for $900.
No, that's pretty close.
Yeah, we need to get back to more of that. Then we can get more educated people. We'll change the world by doing that. But I digress. So how was your experience at Iowa running, and who was your coach there?
Well, I had 2 coaches. I had Francis Kressmeyer my first 2 years because I was distance, and then I had Ted Wheeler afterwards. And it was quite an experience, quite a contrasted styles. Kretz, we called him Kretz. He was of an era, just to give you an idea, I always think this is an interesting story. Kretz in 1935, you may have heard of a meet in Michigan where Jesse Owens tied 3 world records set 3 world records and tied it. Kretz was in one of the races. And he always told the story. Wow. So this is how far back I stretch. He told the story. He was at the Ferry Field for the meet. The world record in the 200, 220, I think it was low hurdles, was 23 flat. Kretz ran 22.9, and he said, guess what? I was second. Jesse Owens beat him.
Wow.
I have a autographed picture of Kretz in that race, and you can tell it's my coach running the race. And he's right like a half set behind Jesse Owens, and Jesse beat him.
You never think, we always talk about Jesse, and of course we should. What he's done and what he did, it was amazing. You never think about the guy that got second, and there had to be an 8th place in that race.
No, and the other half of that is Kretz was they don't keep these type of records anymore, but he was the Big Ten. He had the Big Ten record in most points scored in a season. They don't do that anymore. It's kind of an antiquated thing. But he never won a Big Ten title. So he scored more points in meets than Jesse Owens ever did, but he never won a Big Ten title. And Kretz was All-American numerous times, but never won a Big Ten title because of Jesse Owens. They're the exact same age. They were just weeks apart. And so it was interesting when we were at Drake Relays one year, and Jesse Owens was there, and Chris introduced them, and they talked like they were good friends. And I thought, oh my God, you know Jesse Owens? Yeah,
Yeah.
I ran against him, and they were real good, real close friends. But it was a different era when Kretz used to come to. He wore a sport coat and tie to meets. He smoked cigarettes, and so when we went to meets, I remember this, and we'd go back then you'd go in a station wagon with 7 athletes and the coach. He would roll down the window while we were going to meet and smoke cigarettes and blow smoke out the window. It was a different era. You don't see that anymore. So that's changed. But also the other half of it, the last 2 years, Ted Wheeler, he was a 1952 and 1956 Olympian in the 1500 meters. Best he made was semifinals, which is pretty dang good. He used to go out he would run with us. He was like, when he was in his 40s, he would run with us on some of the workouts, and he would run with us out to the golf course. And I can remember during workouts, he would bum a cigarette from a golfer, and he would smoke the cigarette while we were doing intervals around the cross country course.
What?
Yes. So it was very, very interesting. I mean, kids today wouldn't have any association at all with any smokers.
No.
And I had 2 coaches that were smokers. So
like it would, I go to track meets around the country. If I were at Drake Relays and I'm talking to a coach and he just lights up, I'd be like, wait a minute, maybe you're not a coach then. You must be a parent, because what in the world are you doing?
Yeah.
That'd be the strangest thing in the world to see.
No, it was. And but it was we just had a middling team in Iowa. We had a lot of athletes from Illinois. They're on the team. Jim Doherty, Tom Lachelle. I'm trying to think some of the cross country guys, but we relied on Illinois athletes a lot when we were at Iowa, because Iowa's population is only 2.5 million, and you have that many in the city of Chicago. So
right.
It's changed quite a bit, but and it was an interesting era, because I always think when I was running in college, kids don't think of it this way, but Gary Bjorklund, we used to run dual meets with Gary Bjorklund racing. We had dual meets against Craig Virgin and the rest of the team, Mike Durkin and the rest of the team, Ken Popejoy, Leela Beatty.
Wow.
I'm trying to think. There were guys, Glenn Harrell from Skip Kent. So you would run against Olympians all the time. Winston Reed. Have I run against Mark Winston Reed? Yes, a million times. So it was a lot. But I remember when I see guys, I always joke, like I tell them to turn around. I said, "Oh, that's the only part of you I recognize. It's the back of your head," because I never was in front of you. We had a lot of good athletes. It really wasn't. So it was a different era, because you ran dual meets. I would say in cross country, we had maybe triangulars, but there was no such thing as invitational ever. We never went to, in all my 4 years of college, I never went to invitational. It was always so it's a different type of feel now when kids go to big meets on weekends. We never had that at all. So it's a struggle.
You probably went to Drake Relays, was probably your big invitational on a yearly basis for track.
Very much so. Drake Relays were, it was the most wonderful thing I ever saw. I'll tell you a story, and this is true, and I use this in my book. In 1970, my younger brother and I were dropped off in the interstate in Iowa City at 7 a.m. And we hitchhiked, my brother and I hitchhiked to Des Moines, and we used to hold up a sign that had DM. I remember we put DM on it. My mom would, fine, my mom's conservative. We would hitchhike. We always got a ride within 15 minutes. They dropped us off at 31st Street. We walked to Drake Stadium, so maybe 4 or 5 blocks, and watched the NCAA championships in 1970. And I saw the famous scene where Steve Prefontaine cut his foot before the meet. I was at that. That's the NCAA championships in 1970. So one of the things, and I changed this in the book, but I remember after the race, he went around the stadium, and he was holding his shoes in his hand, and you could see the blood on his foot, because he had gauze around his foot, and there was just red. You could see the blotchy red. I remember it distinctly, because and I reached out to slap his hand, and he missed my hand. I'm like, I thought I could have said I slapped hands with Steve Prefontaine, and I just couldn't reach far enough. I couldn't get him. So that was my the story with that. But I mean, I saw Jan Johnson win probably the only NCAA title, outdoor title, indoors, because it was raining.
So at Drake, I'm shocked.
Yeah, you're right there. But so it was a big meet, and to qualify for the Drake Relays for any event in high school as a high schooler was huge. I mean, that was the era of Jim Duncan and a lot of. I saw probably 1, 2, 3 world records at the. I've seen a lot just at Drake, but I mean. I have seen quite a bit, and it's interesting to see how much. I'll tell you a quick story and just made me think of world records. I was at a meet last weekend. Jim Spivey coaches at Latin. He helps with the Latin team in cross country. And I've seen 11 world records in person. I've been there and watched 11 world records. And I was going to Jim. Well, Jim, how many world records have you seen? And he goes, well, I was in 4 world records myself, he didn't set them, but I thought, oh my gosh, that's a pretty good seat. So it was quite an amazing meet. But Drake has changed so much because it was era of Jim Duncan and a sunken football field. I don't know if you remember that it used to be a sunken football field. So actually people's heads were at track level. It was down below. So it was a little bit different, but they had the old timing stands. You remember they had judges. It must have been 15 feet high, where the timing judges would on a stand that would go up like stairs, I guess. Right. I would describe it. And it had to be 15 feet high. And so they have like 3 on every single row and you had that. So they had 24 timers up there. Just a different era. And so that Drake was by far, that was bigger than the state meet, no question. Because you qualified for that, you were good.
I find it fascinating that you hitchhiked to Des Moines, and in today's world where, there was no connectivity to you. You were on your own. No one would know if you went to Des Moines, if they took you somewhere else, and who you're with, and all that kind of stuff. And in today's cell phone, GPS, text messaging, social media world, we would know where you are, where you are at any second. And yet, I hesitate to think that any parent would allow their child to do what you did. They'd be like, no, you're crazy. You're not doing it. Call an Uber.
And it's the amazing thing is my mother is the least, she couldn't be less a risk taker. She is not, she would never do anything. So that's how comfortable we felt. But we did the same. We actually had an uncle who lived in Des Moines, and we stayed with him and then slept overnight and then went back the next day. But yeah, we just walked. I still remember we walked back onto the interstate through Des Moines and hitchhiked back home. That's how we got home.
That cracks me up.
Yeah.
Well,
so
while you're at Iowa during your undergrad years, what were you studying? What did you think you were going to become professionally, and was coaching even a thought at that point?
I was a phys ed major. That was the start, and it was kind of a natural thing. I started as a teacher in high school, but I always knew that I wanted to be a coach. I knew that from a real young age. I mean, it's like I used to work with I always forget stuff like this, but I taught my younger brother and sister to play tennis. I taught my 3 youngest siblings to ride their bike. And I'm only like 3 or 4 years older than some of them, so it's not a big age gap. But I was a natural born teacher. It was something that I enjoyed quite a bit. And so we had a great biomechanics. I don't know if you would have heard of Jim Hay. He wrote Biomechanics and Sports Athletics. Jim Hay, there was Jeffrey Tyson, which is the grandfather. That guy, he's from England. He was, because I heard Bob talk about some names now, Bob Thurnhofer, talk about current names now. And this guy he wrote books like in 1950s. So they were older books, but Jeffrey Dyson studied mechanics, so he was the most knowledgeable. But we had him on campus. I had Jim Hay, he was the national sports biomechanist for the United States. He's dead now. But I had a great physiology instructor, and I'm going to blank at his name. He's dead, so he won't know that I can't remember his name. But, I had some great teachers, and it was just like a wonderful experience. And so I thought that this would be something I could do. And I started out in high school. It's funny how you start a career, and we talked a little bit before. My first coaching job was coaching eighth grade football, seventh grade girls basketball. Now, I played football in seventh grade. I didn't have a clue.
Yeah, I was wondering.
I didn't know how you start practice. And then I had girls basketball, eighth graders, and they were. I'm surprised I'm not an alcoholic from that day. So you get a career like that, but I knew I wanted to coach regardless, and I enjoyed it. I've coached golf too. Another story. Have you ever played? Do you play golf?
I wouldn't call what I do golf. Yeah.
We played at a Mid Prairie, which is south of Iowa City. We had a sand golf course. You ever played on sand greens? Okay.
No.
A sand green is like a flat sand trap that you have a pin. They have a path, a runway that they drag it so it's flat and level. So every time you all chip into the green, the ball just dies because it's landing in sand.
Yeah.
There's a string in the pin. You walk the ball around to the runway, across the green, and then you pull a pin and then you putt. Well, the one thing that's nice about it is you can see how it breaks exactly. So if you're the first one, the longest one, the people behind you can see exactly how the ball, because it leaves a trail in the sand. So that was my first coaching experience. I played golf, but I never coached golf. I had no idea what to do. So that was my start. I remember I did a good enough job, but when they did a shot, you've heard of a shotgun start in golf? I don't know if you ever have.
Oh, shotgun.
Shotgun. They started every single hole. Well, in Iowa, they literally get a shotgun and they shoot it on the air. They don't start at, this time. They just shoot a shotgun and you start playing. So that was the first time I never realized that expression was literally fire a shot to start up. So it was a little bit of experience. But yeah, I started out, coaching was always what I had in mind. And I got my first job we lived in Des Moines at the time. My first job was at Simpson College. And it was, I always think it's interesting to see where people start because it's not glamorous. I get, over the years, I've had a lot of, and you would know too, a lot of athletes who want to start at, Auburn, or that's not going to happen. You're going to start it. And Simpson College at the time was not much. I mean, I was a women's coach there. We probably had 11, 12 women on the team. My office was in the lobby of the athletic facility. I sat at a lounge and used the coffee table, and that's where I did all my work from. So I didn't even have an office. And I was paid $1,500, I remember, over a year. We would take sack lunches to meets. Boys and girls, the men and women would travel together. It was a great experience because it made me do everything right off the bat. I think some of the problems with a lot of young coaches is they have such a narrow band of experience, and it's better to be doing everything and then whittle it down rather than the other way around.
What years was this at Simpson?
I would say late 70s. I'm bad on years. I would say, if I had to guess, I'd say 78, 79, and there somewhere in there. Twice. Now, he was after me, but he went to Simpson College. I even think Bruce Jenner is a good example. I remember when I think of Drake, Bruce Jenner, I knew him from 1974, 75 in there. He was a good athlete. I remember he was really, really talented. I could tell he was going to be an Olympian because he would win the Drake relays, and there wasn't anything he couldn't do very well. He was a so-so pole vaulter, but he got real good quickly. So he improved a lot. But those Iowa colleges in there are a lot of, Simpson, Central, Wartburg, a lot of Iowa colleges were in there. And it was a good experience because I got a chance to do recruiting. I got a chance to do, coach every event. I coached events I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And this was an era where you were just starting to get floppers in there. You always saw, when I started out, give you an idea how my brothers got started in track. we used to spade the garden. We used to get like it was trim on the edging of the roof in your house. I can't think what it's called. But anyway, we would pound that into the garden. We would get a string and put it across pegs, and we would high jump, and we had to do scissors because you couldn't do flop. You would have been dead.
Right.
And that's actually how my brother was one of the last straddle high jumpers. If he had ever, if they ever ranked the highest all-time straddle high jumper, he was probably like 15th of all time ever straddle high jumper. So he went pretty high. I mean, now the record's 8 feet, so he's a million miles for that. But at the time, he was ranked in the world with a 7.4. So he's pretty good.
It's interesting. I was going to ask you this about your coaching football and basketball, but you mentioned this at Simpson, coaching other events that you had never not only coach because you're a rookie coach essentially at this point, but obviously never competed in as you were more of a distance runner. So how did you take on that challenge, whether it was the football, I'm gonna say you never played and, didn't know the X's and O's, if you will, didn't even know how to start a practice. How did you figure out, like, what was your method to, like, okay, well, I'm in it, I am the coach, so how do I coach football, or how do I coach this new event shot put? I've never done this. Take us through what your thought was there. Were you intimidated, or what resources did you use?
Well, it was, I'm a voracious reader, and so I would make a point to read as many books as I can. But I had greats like Jim Hay, who I mentioned was a biomechanist. He taught at Iowa. He went through all sports, and he would teach you mechanically why you had to do things. And so, for example, like in the flop, Fosbury flop, when you arch over the bar, you're over the bar like this. The only way you can make your feet go up is if your head go up, because there's an opposite action reaction. And so I always used that when I thought about stuff. And so I thought mechanically first, even if I didn't know what I was doing, I thought mechanically, because I watch pitchers, I watch golfers, I watch any sport, and I can tell them what they're doing wrong because I look at the mechanics of what they're doing. But that's how I got through initially. We didn't have the amount of books that we have and videos, and it was tough. I mean, just to give you an idea, later on down the road when I was coaching, I used to take an 8mm film of an
Hold on.
high jump.
Now, a good portion of our listeners have no idea. They've heard of a movie called 8mm, but they don't know what 8mm film is. Now, what you're describing is that old school scene in the movie with the reel on one side and the reel on the other, and for some reason in every movie it always ends and flick. No one stops in the middle of a movie anymore. So you were taking 8mm film, the canisters. Yeah.
And so what you would do is you would take 8mm, because we had a camera, and I'd take the film it, send it to Minneapolis, because that was the only place that I could send it to that was close. And they would send it back like 4 or 5 days later. So now you could use your phone. Then it'd take us 10 days to get a video. Film.
Wow. I don't think I realized that. I don't know why. I think I assumed when you filmed, you could then go take it to the machine and just automatically, it still had to be processed.
Yeah, just like you develop a picture, exact same thing.
Interesting.
So it was very demanding. The other thing I had is, and Dr. Hay had this, what was called a graph check camera, and it would take 8 consecutive Polaroid shots. And so you could set the timing in between the shots. So if you were doing the high jump, you would time it so you get the last maybe 4 steps. And you could do that, or pole vault, you could get the plant and the up over the bar. And so graph check was nice. That was like a huge advance. That was probably late 70s. So you could pull just like a Polaroid, and shake it out. And I always think shake it like a Polaroid. That's exactly what you did. You shook it like a Polaroid. And so we went through that. And so we could have an instantaneous picture. And it was like, oh my God, that was huge.
Is that the same? I've seen the Giedroot, the hurdler, the series, and it was always like 3 or 4 panels. Is that this kind of the same technology?
Exactly what it was. In fact, Bill Bergen at Iowa State, because that was one of my stops, he actually used film and cut out every 3rd frame, and he made a book you could fan, and they would show an action. So you could see each frame and look at it and study it, and you could fan it and then actually see it in full motion. So it was,
that reminds me of the Duncan Atwood books. He has a lot of those flip books. I think it's exactly what he calls them. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, so you're bitten by the bug, if you will, at Simpson. You're a coach. You are a coach now. Take us through the next steps.
Yeah. Well, I know that I was at Simpson for just 1 year. And then after that, I went to grad school because I knew I wanted to be a college coach. That I wanted Simpson. Now, I'm not saying anything against Simpson; it's a great school, but at the time, it wasn't a place to end up at. It was a place you started and moved on. And so I went to grad school at Iowa State and worked with Bill Bergen. Bill Bergen was a great coach, great mentor. I mean, if I think of, and you could say this yourself, if I think of some of the most influential mentor I had in my career, Bill Bergen was one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Very meticulous, very hardworking, very thorough. He just did a wonderful job. Now, when he started, I think he was coaching maybe in the late 70s is when he started at Iowa State. Iowa State was a terrible program. They just weren't doing very well. And within by 1981, they were Big 8 champs, and it was Big 8, not Big 12.
Yeah.
Big 8 champs. And Iowa State they had a good team. He had some foreign athletes that were phenomenal. He had a great bunch. I mean, he had David Career, who probably ran 148, something like that, in 800. He had so many good athletes. I mean, down the road, he had Ubesan Diki, who set the world record in the 5,000 meters. Maybe it's 10,000 meters, I'm thinking. So phenomenal. I mean, Bob Verbeek, who runs the Van Dam meet in Belgium. He had so many good athletes, but Bill was, I couldn't thank him enough for all the work he did, because he gave me the opportunity to coach all the jumpers. So I coached the triple jump, the long jump, the high jump, and the pole vault.
Interesting.
And again, one of my friends in college was Dave Nielsen. So I used to help him free time. Dave was a great guy. So I caught a step. I didn't know anything about pole vault, but he said, just catch my step. So I do that all the time because he had to vault after our practice. So I'd stick around and help him. And he'd say, okay, watch my left arm. Well, actually, for him, it's his right arm. He's left-handed. But I mean, so you'd pick up stuff. And so I learned the pole vault from him. I learned the high jump from my brother. My brother also long jump. So I knew quite a bit about the long jump. And then triple jump, that's what I did my master's thesis on at Iowa State.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we had, I still have the chance to do stuff that I had just done a little bit of, and it gave me a chance to do a lot of it of. And so it was a great learning experience.
So you cut out there a little bit. Go back. You said you had your master's thesis was in triple jump, and you said I still have, and it cut out there. Start right there with I still have.
Oh, I still have the 16 millimeter film from that. So there were guys like Sanya Wallaby, who's from Kansas State. I mean, we probably in the Big 8 championships at the time, we probably had 4 of the top 10 athletes in the nation. And so I got to film all these guys, and it was a great experience and to be able to write my thesis on some of the best athletes in the nation. But it was quite an experience, and I even got a picture after the meet. That was the first time Iowa State won the Big 8 title, and I still have on the end of the video is the team throwing him in the steeplechase pit. So nice. He used that video for some of the stuff they used. So it's a strange thing, but it was he raised money for the program. I mean, he used to donate money. Bill Bergen's a millionaire, I'm sure. There aren't many coaches, college coaches, that are millionaires. He's a millionaire because he's got involved in videos. He was one of the first coaches to do videos of Bobby Knight, Coach Krzyzewski. He did all those.
Oh, wow.
Everyone. So he was the first that ever did it. And so as a result, he made a lot of money. But he was a great businessman, a great recruiter, a great sense of humor. He could do straight face and just be pulling, like he would get reporters come in from the student newspaper, and he used to introduce me as the athletic director at Iowa State University. Well, I was only, 22 years old. I obviously wasn't the athletic director, but he would say, what are you thinking? He'd use, I can't think who it was, the AD at the time, but he would do stuff like that all the time. Or, just odds and so he was a great guy. It was a great experience. And I think that, it was, the program is where they are today because of him. So
And where did so you got your master's degree?
we're losing the video a little bit.
Yep. You got your master's degree. Where was the first? I don't call it first job. Simpson was the first job. Where was the first post-master's track coaching job?
Well, I actually got it. I lived in Des Moines at the time, and I got the job at assistant job at Drake. Initially, the first year, and again, this is something for young coaches. I volunteered the first year. I had nothing. My wife had a good job, and so I could afford to do it. But I think too many of them, there's resources where you live, if you're in a big city, but you've got to take advantage of it. And I didn't want to work for nothing at Drake University, but that's the way it was. So I was a substitute teacher and I coached in the afternoon. But the next year I got an assistant job at Drake University. And then I still remember, it's funny how jobs turn over. I can remember one fall, I got a call. We had an office. We only had one phone in the office. Got a call, and the athletic director said, "Could you send the head coach, over to my office?" I said, "Okay." So I said, "She wants you to talk with you." So I sent him over. He came back about 10 minutes later and said, "I was fired, and she wants to talk with you." And I'm thinking, like, "Oh my God!
Oh no!
I'm gonna be fired too."
Right.
And so I go over and I talk with her, and she said, "How would you like to be head coach?"
Oh, that's awkward.
Yes, exactly. Very awkward. And I was 28 years old. And I thought, and so I said, "Can you give me an hour or two to think about it?" I didn't know how to say. So I had to go over and talk with the head coach and said, "What do you think?" And he goes, "I'll take the job." And so that's how I got my first job.
Well, good for him, because he could have been bitter and said, you don't want to work for someone like that, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
That was pretty selfless of them to say, "Hey, man, this is an opportunity for you. Take it and see what happens. You may not like it, but yeah. That's really cool."
Yeah. So it was, sometimes you just get lucky. And I think when we're young, I don't say we expect it, but we think it's just going to go on and on and on like that. And I was fortunate because I had 5 All-Americans at Drake. And as a young coach, here's another good example as a young coach. You think it's only going to get, so if I got 5 when I'm 20 years old, I'm going to have 105. Well, life doesn't always work like that. I was talking with a coach, Kevin Gumerson, who coaches Manuka here in Illinois. And I said, "Kevin, he was state champion, about 3 years ago in cross country. They did a good job." And I said, "Kevin, enjoy it while you have it, because you may have good teams, but you may never have a team this good again. And you just don't know that. And so, go crazy, act, treat it like it's something special, because it is something special."
I agree with that.
Whether I learned from that.
I agree, whether it's a team title, a state title, a conference championship, a national championship, an All-American, those are special. I know it seems like sometimes they grow on trees, so to speak. But I remember, I've told this story before, at a couple of years ago at the indoor national championships at Texas A&M, Oregon's women won by some ungodly number, 20, 30 points, like quote unquote, like if you just look at the point total, they ran away with it. And I remember talking to Robert Johnson, the head coach, and I was like, "Hey man, I know the score shows that it was 30, but these aren't easy." Like it wasn't until way late into the meet, like I think actually might have been the 3,000, which is right by before the 4x4, where he locked it in. And it was like, it was still touch and go, man. It wasn't like basketball where, it's 100-0. It's like, okay, well, we're going to win this one. Each one is special, and you'd never know if the next one's going to come.
Oh,
You can think you do. How many times have you, as of a coach, sat down and said, okay, you know what? This athlete is number one returner, healthy. He or she should win the title. And through a lot of reasons, doesn't. Or, this team is super strong. We're gonna be in the hunt for the title, and you don't win it. They are special, no matter how many. 12 in a row, I don't care. The 13th is the hardest one to get.
No, you're right.
You're
right.
It is special. Take care of that specialness when it happens. Absolutely, man.
Yeah, because I always say success is a Venn diagram with three circles. There's coaching, there's athletes, and then there's the running gods. And sometimes you got two of the three are, thumbs up, but the third one,
yeah, a different finger up.
Good point. But I mean, it's very, there's always luck in every single win. I mean, I can remember this is a great, Mamie Rollins used to coach at Ohio State. They were going to win a Big Ten title if they won the mile relay. It was in Indiana. I think it was Indiana. They won the mile relay, women's. It was probably mile relay back then. Then they won the Big Ten title. And a fan on the last straightaway, a fan walked across the track and knocked her anchor over. It was close enough to the finish line. The baton rolled across the line. And so you can't finish the race without a baton in your hands. So they were disqualified. So they would have been Big Ten champs, but for that. So, I mean,
wow.
it's close. So, yeah, I see stuff like that all the time. So you always think, enjoy it while you have it, because you never know there's a million things that can go wrong when that running gods don't like you, you're in trouble.
I love that you had 5 All-Americans the first year at Drake, and you're like, oh, yeah, this is easy. It's only going to get better.
No. And it's a struggle. And so, I was at Drake a couple of years, and we had good teams. I mean, I had a 6-foot high jumper. I had Lisa Almerson ran 16:20. I can't. It's so long ago I can't remember. But good. We're talking about 1982, 83. We had a women's 4x4 that ran 3:40. I had an athlete indoors. She was second in the nation twice in the 400. So we had a lot of talent, but I just was ready to move on. And having run at a Big Ten school, I wanted to go to a Big Ten school. And so a coach called me. Well, and the story goes, the same AD that called me into her office to say, would you like to be head coach? Oh, probably 2 years later, she asked me into her office, and I thought, what is it now? Because I could always tell by her tone of voice it wasn't good. She said, what is this about you going to Northwestern? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And so she said, yeah, the coach of Northwestern called me today and said he wants to get you coaching there. And I said, I don't know anything about it. I know nothing. And I found out later that Dave Nielsen, my teammate, was at Wisconsin. He'd actually accepted the job and then took a job at Idaho State. And so he ended up saying, well, you should call Jim Knoedel, that he might be interested in doing it. And so that's how Mike Muska got in touch with me. But and so he called me later that day, and I said, yeah, I heard you owe me for the job. It was kind of interesting. But anyway, so, I took the job at Northwestern. It was tough leaving. I mean, we had some good women because we had meets. I know Jim Duncan, who was a Drake Relays announcer. We had an indoor meet. I remember the year before, we competed against Frank Savine. Well, now it's called the Frank Savine Invitational at Lincoln. But it was big meet. They had all the best teams in the nation there. And if they had scored the meet, Drake women would have finished second in the nation. Only team that would have beat us was USC. And they were good at the time.
Wow.
So we had a very good team. But I just wanted to coach in the Big Ten. And so I took the job at Northwestern, and Mike Musk was the coach. And we had a good team. In cross country, I think it was second year, the women finished second in the Big Ten. The men finished third in the Big Ten in cross country. So this is probably 85.
So was there, because Northwestern now is I think a women's only cross country.
Correct.
So was this full men and women and track and field?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So we had a good team. I mean, we had All-Americans in the 4x8. They had a 4x8 at nationals. Good team, very good team. We had 3 guys that broke 150, and this is again mid 80s. Mike Muska was a great middle distance coach. Great. He did a wonderful job. But anyway, we had other athletes because we would get football players to come out. And I remember there was George, what was his last name? It's too long ago, I can't remember. But we had guys that would place in the Big Ten in the 200 in the long jump. We had a guy in the finals of the hurdles, but didn't score any points. So we had some good athletes.
When did that change at Northwestern?
I think it was 87. They dropped track.
For both?
I still have, right around there. But we had men's and women's. D. Todd was the women's coach. John Capriati from Nike, you might know the name. He was the women's assistant. I was the men's assistant.
Really? Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know he was at Northwestern. I know Kansas State, I think, and Cal Poly Slow, I think, as well.
Pomona. I think. Well, you could be right.
It's one of those two.
You
I
could
get
be right.
I'm the worst at those two. I mix them up all the time.
I bet a nickel that I'm right, so
okay.
I won't doubt you. But John was a phenomenal recruiter. Phenomenal. I mean, if I just say, like, all my career, and you've been coaching long enough, good recruiters are just amazing. They recruit 24 hours a day and they know everyone. And well, that's John Capriati. He knew everyone. He was a great recruiter. But he brought in some great female recruits just in 2 years. He turned the program from one that was like 8th, 9th, 10th every single year into second in the Big Ten. He had a great group. And Muska was a good recruiter on the men's side. I know he did a phenomenal job. I mean, we had Tim Phillips was a 858. Bob Cole was a 151. Steve Miller had the fastest 3,000 meter in the nation. We had a lot of, just talent. We had Paul Stogren was a 408 mile in high school. We had a lot of good athletes.
Where the track body is appropriately up in arms right now with Central Michigan, William and Mary, Minnesota dropping. I don't know that we know much history, at least me personally, of Northwestern. Do you know much about when and why? What was the decision at a Big Ten school? I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people are concerned that Minnesota of the Big Ten dropped because it feels like, well, man, if a Big Ten school can drop, who am I if I'm in any other conference or any other division? But here we have some historical aspects of Northwestern, a great Big Ten school.
Yes.
The very much Ivy League of the Big Ten, if you will. The academics are amazing, but they dropped quite a while ago. Do you know much about why and how that decision came about?
I was actually there, and I part of the reason you have to go back into the early 80s when Northwestern lost 33 games in a row. So they had the worst football record in the nation.
Back in the 80s? I remember that I was up there, I graduated in 94. I remember I was in Chicago. I went to an engineering school in Chicago in 95. And I remember Northwestern was on a terrible streak at that point as well. So this was before that. He was several long streaks. Oh, that's not good. Yeah, okay.
And so Doug Single was the athletic director back then. Doug Single came from Stanford. Another name you might recognize, I'll think of her name. She's the athletic director at Sandy Barber, athletic director of Penn State now. She was this associate AD. We had a great staff there. But Doug Single was I'm trying to think how to say this nice. He was a man with a vision, but he had his toes in other people's business. I'll leave it at that. But he was a great AD. But I can still remember the day he came in. He talked with Mike and I and said, we want the football program to be good, but we don't have the money to do it. So where we're going to get the money from is from you guys. And so they dropped the program. They let anyone, I think 87, if I remember, they dropped the program. They let anyone on scholarship keep on scholarship, but they took all the budget and put it in football. And so that's where they ended up starting to develop the program. It got a little better, but it was a slow process. I mean, it was.
Really not until recently when Fitzgerald took over as the football coach have they been good. I mean, like I said,
In
when
the
I was there in
60s, yeah.
yeah, I mean, when I was, like I said, I was there in '94, and I remember it was a perennial. My fraternity used to go and work to get, clean, sell
Right. Mhm.
all that kind of stuff, the brochures or whatever, pamphlets. But I remember they were just, they were the notorious 0-10, 1-9s, whatever. And then when Pat Fitzgerald, I think his name's Pat Fitzgerald, took over
Yeah,
as the head
Pat, yeah.
coach here in the 2000s, now they're bowl eligible almost every year. I
They're
guess
good.
that's the barometer for football right now, right? If you can get 500, 6 wins, then you get to go to bowl game, and it feels like a successful year.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
that crazy? People talk about
I
ribbons
know.
for every kid, trophy for every kid, and yet here we are. If you can just get 500, if you
I know.
you'll get rewarded, air quotes there, with a bowl game. Like there's
Yeah.
there's mediocrity. That's what we're fighting for. That's why we're dropping track across the nation, so we can support teams to win 6 games and go to a bowl game and lose money at that bowl game, by the way.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the direction of big time sports is going the wrong way. I mean, that's why you're seeing, like, I went to Iowa, so they dropped men's and women's swimming. I think men's and women's tennis, and they dropped men's gymnastics. And the reason is they spend money like it's going out of style, and they don't save anything for a rainy day. And so as a result, it's killing them.
Gary Wilson of University of Minnesota fame was on the
No, well,
podcast, the Meeting of the Unknown Minds, and he was talking about, it's going to save, I think it's something like $3 million or something like that, and they're at a $70 million deficit, and Vin Lanena had a good response to that. He goes, $3 million, so what? On 70 million dead,
exactly.
$3 million. But Gary Wilson said, "Hey man, let me see your budget. I can find you more than 5 million like that." Hotel nights on home game. I mean, there's just
You're exactly right.
so many just ill spending, and these ADs. We've had some conversations in the past. I think Ron Alice and I talked about this as well. These ADs are now quote unquote CEO ADs. But when you think about it, it's like, well, okay, well, that means you're a business acumen, and you know how to balance the books and things like that. Well,
Yeah.
you're not. You're not a CEO. You're a who was the guy, the famous CEO? I think he took over one of the, maybe Kellogg's, and name was Jack, and maybe Ford. One of the he was called Chainsaw Jack, because his way of making a company back profitable was take over a CEO, slash the employee,
Yep.
lay off X amount, cut spending. And it's like, oh, you're not building, you're not building growth, you're cutting the growth. And that doesn't grow. And that's what we seem to be doing in athletic departments now. We're cutting to grow in this football, which, I mean, there's 10 schools at this point that can win the national championship. There's 20 schools maybe that turn a profit. It doesn't feel like we're growing our academic. Don't forget, even though this is athletic department, these are academic institutions. It doesn't feel like we're growing academic institutions here. We're slicing and dicing our way for a prize that's unwinnable for 99.9% of us.
I've also thought that, and I've expressed this opinion for 5 or 6 years, is there needs to be a Division I AA or something of that nature. To think that the Loyolas and the Illinois States and the Eastern Illinois and the Western Illinois can compete with University of Illinois and University of Iowa and University of Michigan, they can't. It's not even fair to think that each Big Ten school last year got $54 million from TV revenue. And how much did Loyola get when they won? They finished 4th in the nation. I think they probably got maybe a couple million, maybe. But they had to split a lot of that up with the Missouri Valley. And how much TV money do they get every year? Loyola would be lucky if they got 100,000. I don't think they do, but they'd be lucky if they did. Right. And so you got 54 million, and it's not fair. And what's happened at like your Central Michigan, they're trying to join the big boys. They can't. It's just not, that's unrealistic. And so I really think they need to, right now it needs to happen. They need to have the Power 5 and whatever the other 5 are, and then just make a line in the sand.
So that was brought up by Gary Wilson as well in that podcast, which again, if you, I so thankful that you would listen to us here at Gill Athletics on the Connections podcast. There's a lot of great coach-focused podcasts out there, and one of them is the Meeting of the Unknown Minds, hosted by a good friend Matt Eshe at University of Alabama
I know
Birmingham.
Matt very well.
Yeah, yeah, Iowa grad. Oh yeah, I didn't know you were an Iowa grad, so as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, I got to text him and let him know I had an Iowa grad on. He'll be stoked.
He's in my book too, but
oh, good. Oh, perfect. But it's interesting. I lost my train of thought there, but just
the Meeting of the Minds.
But Power Five. So Gary brought up, he's like, if the Power Five has talked about for years about branching off, doing their own thing, whatever, yada yada. I believe, and I'm definitely paraphrasing, maybe misquoting him a little bit, but he was talking about if we as track people do not want that to happen, because if the Power Five breaks off in their own thing and there's no rules anymore, well, NCAA has minimum sport rules, and track is one of the best for them, right? It's 6 sports if they don't cut them.
Right.
But track will be gone if the Power Five breaks out. It'll be a football and basketball, and maybe baseball division at that point. So we need to be together and have Division I. You're right. I think it's about a definition of what success is, right? So in football, if you're not 500 and not going to a bowl game, that's not successful. And some places, too many places, it's not successful if you didn't win the national championship, which again, there's maybe 10 teams, maybe 20 in the odd year, right? But we have to define success differently, much like in track and field. It's not always it is not a failure necessarily if your kid doesn't win the title, conference, nationals, whatever, or if you don't qualify X amount of people for nationals. That is a goal to strive, but the sport and what we're doing as coaches is much bigger than that simple X and O of, All-American or not All-American, or top 5 trophy or not top 5 trophy. It's much, much bigger. There's so many people out there, CEOs, business owners, teachers, firemen, who got their confidence to do what they do because of a coach in track and field. They achieved success. They weren't the number 1 runner, but they're like, you know what? I went from, we had a guy on the podcast. His very first day of cross country, he was not just dead last at practice. Like there was a distance between him and the next person. And because coach encouraged him and believed in him, he came back the next day and kept working. And eventually this guy went on to run in college and became a college track coach. I mean, what more? There's so many stories like that of people and coaches and their effective to their lives that if we just go down to just dollars in football and basketball, well, then that's what I thought. That's what the NFL and NBA and MLB was supposed to be for, not student athlete academic institutions.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm going to step off my soapbox. Sorry, you got me going. Maybe rightfully so, again, because we're in a time period right now for track, and specifically collegiate track and field, that we have got to band together and fight together for the greater good, because we have so much good in this sport and with our coaches. Okay, so you're at Northwestern. They dropped. That's where you got us started on this. You went to Northwestern and it dropped. So take us through what happened after Northwestern, and let's keep moving forward.
Well, I went down the road. Loyola is actually 2 blocks north of where I'm sitting right now. So we live by Loyola. Gordon Thompson was there. You've seen old YMCA type of gyms where they have a circular oval, like an oval around top of the basketball court. I don't know if you've seen, they have a lot. They had we had one in my junior high and high school, and they had one at Simpson, actually, exact same thing. But it was just a flat surface, and that's where they put bleachers up during basketball games. And so what we did was co-opted it more or less, built a board track. So on the straightaway, you just had flat. You just got 2x6s. I can't remember. 2x4s with 2x6s, and just put plywood down on it, right against the side, on the corner, and we nailed the plywood to the bleachers and made that as the bank around the corner. And so we had a track that was 12 and a half laps to the mile. And we literally built it out of, there must have been 150 sheets of plywood, 4x8 sheets of plywood. But I mean, that's what we did workouts indoors. And in the Midwest, I mean, most of your season is indoors. But Gordon I didn't do it. Gordon did it. But I helped him build the track, and we had workouts. But we would have so many athletes running on the track, literally, it would be a continuous line all the way around the track. So we would have the men, there'd be like 10 or 12 men, they would take off, and the women would be on their tail. And so there would be runners, because there's only 12 flaps, which is probably 125 yards around. So we have 125 yards worth of runners. And they just be going. You had to jump to the outside so that the runners could keep going as you circle behind. So it was like how would I describe it? Like getting on a merry-go-round. That's how I describe it as. But we had great workouts up there. I remember Eddie Slow timing him. He did a workout. He ran a 450 mile, 2 minutes rest. Then he ran 440, 430, 420. He ended up running a 412 his last mile on that track. I mean, that was amazing, amazing, amazing. So Eddie was a great runner, sub 4 minute miler. But Gordon he did a wonderful job. I mean, it was a no-name program, and he made him a power. We used to have some great battles with Joe Piani at Notre Dame. Joe always seemed to get the better of us, but it was close. Joe had some great runners, but Gordon did a great job, and that was a good experience. I worked with, but we had to do stuff. You think of, I don't know if you were ever like this at Troy or any of the other places. We used to high jump, and we only had one section of a high jump pit. So what you had to do was, and we used old volleyball standards, put a crossbar, and I fashioned it so you could attach a crossbar. It wouldn't come off. And then we would put the pit in the right place, and they would high jump into the pit. It was only one section of pit, so if you missed the pit, you were dead. We used to throw the shot in the balcony. There was a visitor's balcony of the swimming pool. That's where you threw the shot, but it was probably 8 feet wide. So if you threw it off, the shot went into the pool, and it was a water polo pool. And so the shot would go all the way down to 12 feet. And so the shot putter had to dive into the pool, bring the shot up, and then we'd go back to practice. So that's how loyal it was. We had to improvise so much. There's so much.
We weren't that bad at Troy, not far off, but that high jump example is spot on. I used to coach at De La Salle in the Chicago Catholic League.
Oh yeah.
And it was before it was before we had the indoor track. That came. Yeah. They when I left, they decided to do an indoor track. Yeah. But no, this was all hallway stuff and cafeteria, and perfect example of that was literally one section of high jump pit. I don't even know if it was high jump, to be real. It could have been like an old wrestling mat or something. I don't know. But one little section and a pretty good high jump. We had a 6'4", 6'5", high jumper there. Yeah. You're right. You gotta square that bad boy up right, and don't do anything different. Do the exact same thing you just did, because if you miss, you're bad news.
Yeah.
Bad
but
news.
we had a track meet there against DePaul, and Dave Dopick, the current coach, he ran there. He was NCAA champion in the 200. So he ran on the track. So we had NCAA champion there, but he fell in the race. I remember they never came back. But if you ever talk to Dave Dopick, he might remember the race, but I remember really well because he just skidded on his chest. I bet he skidded 10 yards.
On plywood.
Yeah. And he's a tall guy. When he went down, boy, he went down. So yeah. I still remember that. But, that's another thing too. People don't realize, I remember going to nationals in Detroit in early 80s. It was a Joe Louis. I don't remember where it was at. It was the Silverdome. But anyway, the tracks were made out of wood. Mm-hmm. And so you would wear short spikes, 1/4-inch pin spikes is what you'd wear a lot of times. And I can remember a runner from Southern Illinois falling, and they were picking splinters out of his chest for like half an hour. That's the old days. But that's why when kids complain about what they have now, it's like, you don't know what it was like.
We had the same thing. I'm not that old. I'm 44, but in Alabama,
I'm a 68.
Yeah, growing up in Alabama, running high school track there for indoor, same thing. We only had one indoor track in the whole state, and it was in a barn. It was the old plywood, track, and no
Yeah.
rail on the fifth lane or fourth lane, whatever it
Yeah.
was. So sometimes people would fall. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
it seems
Literally.
comical. People would fall off. Same thing. If you fell, oh, you were picking splinters out for days. So when I got to Gill, because that was my experience, of running track in high school, and then I coached, so I got to go to some of the best facilities around Clemson.
Yeah.
Back then, not that University of Florida would have said their indoor facility back then was one of
Well,
the
it
best,
was a nice,
but it
it
was
was a
nice.
nice track
Yeah,
though.
yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
was nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I got to Gill Athletics, and the city of Birmingham was bantering back and forth of having an indoor
Mhm.
facility, which, spoiler alert, now became the Crossplex. It was my mission, my sole mission, was to make sure that was a Gill facility, because that was my home track. I was like, this track is quote unquote not supposed to be in Alabama. So
Mhm.
it was mission critical for me. It's like, okay, we're gonna upgrade from the barn in Decatur where we used to run. We're gonna have this amazing hydraulic, NCAA
It's a
worthy
beautiful.
facility. I was like, we're getting it. And that's why I call it my home track, even though I've never run there and never
Yeah.
coached there.
Yeah.
I love that facility because running on boards is for the birds.
Yes, it is.
and
Yes,
running
it is.
on 12 and a half laps to the mile track is for the birds, my man. Holy cow. I mean, I love that you did what you had to do. I
Yeah.
mean, that's better than nothing, but that is brutal.
But I always think that experience prepared me for any adversity down the road. When I was after I was at Loyola, I went to University of Illinois at Chicago, and that's where I spent the brunt of my career. But we had a pole vaulter. One of my first years of pole vaulter, we didn't have any pole vault pits. So I would go to high schools and they'd have single sections of pit, a pole vault pit. So you could see the big section, 3 sections, the apron up front. And they would get, one would get ruined. And so they'd buy a new one, and they had sections just sitting there. So I'd go around the schools and ask. So we had, I bet you from 4 high schools, I had sections of pits. And then I ordered the cover pad, and it worked out fine, but it certainly wasn't ideal. And then I used to go to high schools, and I would say, do you have any poles that are big and you'll never use again? And I remember, I think it was one of the Plainfield schools. I think where Jake, who's a pole vaulter at North Central.
Jake Winder.
He had some huge poles because he was a good high, but they were never going to use him again because he was too big. And so we used to borrow poles from high school for my vaulters because they were bigger kids.
Right.
And that's where you saw, if you ask me how many poles I bought, maybe 8 or 10 over 21 years. Right. But I bet you we had 40 or 50 poles. You just get here and there and whatever. So we'd get it done. But, so I just assembled a pole vault pit out of bits and pieces. We built a runway. People at University of Chicago, they had the facilities build them a runway. Well, it's a nice runway. I built our runway. And so we hooked it together you'd overlap the sections, you drop a pin in it to keep them together. And then we'd roll a runway down, and, so I had to do all that stuff. I would get busted. Schools that had a broken standard, and they were Gill standards too. They were no offense, they were good, but they got busted because they got knocked over in the wind and it bends them. And so I would tell the school, I'll take it if you'll let me put it back together, because I didn't have a budget for stuff like that. There's not in a million years. And so I learned from a young age to be able to do stuff like that. It stunk, but that's the way it was. So I bought many items from Gill, many, but we just had to improvise. That was the reality. Yeah. And if you ask me how much I spend every year out of my own pocket, easily $1,000.
Out of pocket, yeah.
Easily. It's just, UIC wasn't, when I started, you and I could have been on the cross country team. And that's not a compliment to either of us.
Yeah, right. I was about to say, wait, are you sure?
Yes. No. But I built it up until we were a respectable program, but we just didn't have a budget. Who was I talking about the other day? Someone from Indiana, and they said, well, we have like 43 academic advisors in the department. Well, we had one. And so, it's like, wow. This is like apples and oranges, not a comparison. And so but you just deal with what you have. And so that's the way it is. But I think that's the thing that I learned more than anything else was, budget's nice. But see, that's what Big Ten schools, like Randy Hasselbank, who's at Iowa now, was at Loyola. he said he couldn't get used to being in Iowa because they had so much money. He didn't know how to deal with it. They said, you don't do that. We have someone else do it. And that's, see, we were guys that did it. That was reality. But
so what led you go from Loyola to UIC? I mean, they're the same area and same closest to budget and those kind of things. What made you go down to UIC?
Well, I was assistant at Loyola, and I could be head coach at UIC, and it wasn't a good program by any stretch of imagination. They only had cross country. They were one of the schools that dropped track. And when I got the job, I talked to the AD, and he told me we would start track down the road, because it's hard to just be a cross country program to be any good. Kids just won't show up. The women's coaches at Northwestern have done a phenomenal job because they still only have cross country. But I was really I thought this could be better. Now, I never expected a Texas A&M or Auburn or Allen. I knew that wasn't going to happen. But I mean, we could be competitive. And we were down the road. We ended up winning the Chicagoland Championship, which North Central would always win. And we actually won it. And that was like one of the proudest moments. That's
the same conference as North Central?
No. They have the Chicagoland. It's with all the Chicago area schools.
But North Central was in it.
Yeah, the Chicagoland.
You beat North Central.
Yeah.
That's a feather in your cap right there, my friend. Holy cow! Ain't many people can say that. Holy cow!
But I mean, so we could do decent. But it was always like your hands were tied together. You were lucky if you could get this or that, and so it was a struggle, no question about that. But it was, I was thinking, we talked earlier about providing opportunity for athletes. That's what it's all about. I mean, you get so many kids that, I had a kid from Matt Slewski was from Crystal Lake South. He walked in my office one day with his grandfather. I said, "How fast do you run?" He said, 158. Now, if you were at Texas A&M, they go, "Well, see ya." They wouldn't talk to you. But I said, sure, that'll be good. And he ended up running 149.70. So he did good.
Wow.
And you get kids like that. I mean, kids are, but I think some of the proudest things are the kids that, we had guys that were, I would say like a 10-20 high school 2-miler, and they ended up running like 15:03 in a 5K. It's not great by any stretch, but they got better, and now they're coaches themselves. And so I think that was probably the biggest reward of coaching at UIC is you developed kids. You actually could say you developed kids because you had to. You didn't have any choice. You didn't have state champions. You didn't have this or that. You had to make kids who were, all state and cross country to finish 24th. You had to make those into good kids. And I had a lot of kids that were just like that. Brian Dink and Kyle Hauser were in high school. They were okay, but they were dominant in the conference down the road. So it was nice to work with guys like that. And, that's what I had. And Tess Earhart was a female and you had to coach men and women. It wasn't, you coach men, you coached everyone. Tess was a great, great runner. She was a conference champion 2 years in a row. She was all regional 2 years in a row. She was a good runner, but she really developed. And I think that was some of the greatest rewards, seeing athletes running times far beyond what they had done in high school. So I enjoyed that a lot.
Is UIC's, that's where you retired from, correct?
Yes.
What led, I hope to one day, looking at my 401k, I'm not sure it's going to happen, but I'd like to retire one day as well. It seems like I'm 44, so if I double that, maybe by 88, maybe if I do twice as much as what I've done so far. What led, as you're looking at retiring, and obviously, at least from appearances, it looks like you're in good health and good faculties. I mean, it seems like you'll go coach right now, for crying out loud. What led to retirement, and how'd that decision come about?
Well, I think as you get older, I always call it the BS factor. There's a BS meter that goes off, and it goes off much quicker as you get older. And I think, not that it doesn't go off at your age, but it just it's instantaneous. You hear BS and you just, nope. And I think it was frustrating because at UIC, there wasn't enough support to be a successful program. I never had dreams that we could be, national caliber or anything like that. But I think, the AD didn't appreciate, he didn't expect more from me, but I expected more from myself. But he wouldn't give me the opportunity to be better, to be, always first or second in the conference meet. I mean, we would do well in cross country. We'd always be in the top 2 or 3, but I couldn't beat the Butler universities of the conference. I couldn't beat the Loyola universities of the conference. It was, we could always be there, but I just couldn't do it. And it was tough. And so, I always thought in track, being a city school, that we could have attracted a lot of kids from city areas, but he wouldn't allow scholarship money to be used for track athletes. And it's like, so that's when we won the Chicagoland. It was like amazing. I mean, I had a kid that was from, where's he from? Marist. Yeah. Who was Chicagoland champion in the hammer. He'd never thrown the hammer before, but I taught him to throw the hammer, and he was Chicagoland. So you get kids that would develop. I had a kid I saw in gym class one day. I was walking through the gym, and he was probably about 6 feet tall, I'd say, stuffed the basketball. I thought, damn. And so I got him to throw the weight and the hammer, and he was conference champion. It's like, and we're not on the SEC, I understand that. But I mean, relative to where we're at, we were doing good. But if I could have had a little money to attract people, because he ended up quitting because he had to get a job, so you'd lose kids. And that was a frustrating thing, that you potentially be good, but you couldn't.
Yeah, UIC could be, I don't want to call it the hidden gem, because it's right there, but I mean, it's set up to be really, like, you could be a super solid team. You'd need probably some kind of indoor training. Well, Gately Park is opening up soon, so that could be a potential. But it could be a real solid mid-major school. Really could. It could be a UNI, Northern Iowa,
exactly.
Which is,
that's
solid.
A good comparison.
Absolutely. Location, the way the academics are set up, it could be super solid. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because academically, I mean, when I started, I would never name who it was, but I got in 15 ACTs. That's how low the bar was at the time. But towards the end, if you didn't have a 21 or 22, boy, that was a stretch to get them in. Now, I know basketball got them in, but I mean, track didn't get them in. And it's academically, it's become much, they have a great president in the UIC now, Michael, Greek name, I can't think of it. But anyway, they have a good program, and I think they could be, a program that's constantly at the top of the conference meet, and it would represent them well. And it's, you get minority kids that would represent the school well, because that's what the school's made of. Because we had every ethnic, you name it, we had at UIC.
Well, that's what I thought. With the CPS schools, the Catholic League school, I mean, you've got a great mixture. I mean, top to bottom on athletes, everybody. I mean, great area. I always thought Chicago itself is for high school could always be a lot better, but Catholic League was always pretty solid. Public school, a lot of lack of facilities there. I think, at least when when I coached back in the mid '90s there. Yeah, but there was always great athletes. I mean, there was plenty of kids going to Big Ten football and basketball. I mean, there's especially basketball. Holy cow! I mean, that is the basketball capital. But great athletes there. Well, so you went into you retired. You didn't go into retirement. You retired. And maybe here lately, you decided you can't get enough of track and field, so you decided to write a book. Tell me about this book. This is interesting.
Well, it all started when I think back. John L. Parker. Everyone has probably read. Anyone who's distance runners read Once a Runner. That book inspired me a lot. It was, if you ask me if I've read it 10 times, so I'm sure I have. Whenever you needed inspiration, I would read the book, because there were a lot of days that you were down as a coach. You thought, read this, and it'll inspire you. So I did. But I was always one of the things that I prided myself on when I was coaching was writing good recruiting letters. You know what recruiting letters is. And I think for kids, they don't realize that they're not the only one you send a letter to. You send hundreds of letters out. But I always made sure to tailor a letter specifically. I always had one paragraph in every single letter tailored specifically to that person. And so I can remember sitting next to Mark Burns many times at the state meet, and we'd all be writing little notes in our programs about. And so I would write things I saw at the state meet. And so I'd write that, and then I'd put that in the letter. Mark was probably doing other things, but I don't. But anyway, I would do that, and I'd write nice recruiting letters. And one of the things that struck me throughout my career was I always got kids who went to, not to other schools always, but they would show me the recruiting letter, like while they were in college at University of Illinois or University of Iowa. Said, your recruiting letters were the best. They kept them.
It was impactful.
Yes.
Wow.
And because I knew how to, I don't want to say capture the moment, but I knew what to say, and I was good at that stuff. So I enjoyed writing. And so that was one of the things I hung my hat on. Last few years of my career, coaching career, I started writing more and more. I had a vision of putting down my experience over 35 years of college on paper. And I started writing, odds and ends. In college coaching, people don't realize how many hours you work. Like to say I work 60 hours all the time. Oh yeah, all the time. Not sometimes, all the time. You just worked a ton of hours. That's the way it was. And so glamorous, it wasn't glamorous at all. It is in retrospect, but it wasn't at the time. I would say it's as glamorous as the 24th mile in a marathon. It's not glamorous at all.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, I mean, it's glamorous when you're done, but it's not while you're doing it. And so I started writing, and I put together stories, and I was trying to figure out the idea, but I always thought to myself, people are always comparing athletes and eras. They're always comparing Jim Ryan to Alan Webb. They're comparing Steve Prefontaine to Dathan Ritzenheim. And I thought that was the basis of my story. I thought a comparison between the eras, because people are saying, oh yeah, we ran this and that. But because people say, like Alan Webb he ran 3:53, I think, in high school. But Jim Ryan ran 3:55 in high school. So it's like, to say one was better, because Jim Ryan ran it on cinders.
Right.
Alan Webb ran it on artificial track. Jim Ryan ran it in, well, now I would say crappy Adidas. Now they're good shoes now, but then they weren't very good. I still have them. There's so much difference. So I wanted to compare the eras. So that's what I did, was created two characters. One character was from the father in the late 60s in Iowa City, which is where I'm from. They always say, write what you know about, so that's what I know
Bingo.
about. So I created a fictional character, but the story is based on real people. One of the things that and John L. Parker is a much better writer than me, but one of the things that I enjoyed about my book is that I use real people. I don't use fictional people. Although the main characters are fictional, I shouldn't say. But I base everything on real events and real people. So when I talk about, for example, in the book, my character, the father, runs against Steve Prefontaine when he set the American record in the indoor 2 mile. Now, this character never actually ran an event, but I know exactly what Steve Prefontaine ran. I know the event, the site, the venue, the other competition. So I use those people and insert my character into the story. And it makes it real because there's people like in my story, Pat Mandera is a great runner from Indiana. Pat's in a Facebook group I'm involved in. But I saw him run many times, although, again, it's always the back of his head. But so I insert my character into the story. And so there are events that I put in the book that my character didn't actually finish second or third or fourth or 10th, but I say it's fiction. So, because fiction is like when you write a book, I'm reading, a book now, it's World War II is involved in it. That's a fact. There was World War II. So every book has fact in it. So I just put more fact in it and then use fictional characters. So that was the basis. And his son is from the west suburbs of Chicago, fictional school, although you'll know what school if you read it. And I create a character, and then I go back and forth from the eras. So I say, when Jim Sr. was a sophomore in high school, and Jim Jr. was a sophomore in high school, and I go back and forth.
Oh, interesting.
So so you can see just by the story what they had and what they didn't have. Good example is in college, there was no such thing as a rabbit ever. I never had a rabbit. And we would go to meets in the new millennium I mean, North Central, and they have rabbits in a race. Well, we never had that at all. So it was so much, just small stuff like that. The only I ran on a all-weather track twice in my high school career, twice. That's it. Cinder all the rest of the time. And people don't know what it's like to be able to have to run in lane outside of lane one because it's so torn up. You couldn't run fast. They don't understand what it's like. And the training tips, the what a computer did to this era. And so what I do is I juggle back and forth between the two eras, trying to see, so people can see like, wow, they had this. And I'm not saying one era is better than the other. I'm just saying you can see the differences between the two.
So you said you jump back and forth, so you don't tell it doesn't go 0 through 100 pages is Joe Senior, and then 101 through 200 is Joe Junior. So there's actually a juxtaposition. I tried that word the other day. I don't think I can say it. Thank you very much. This is why I don't write.
No, that's why I write, because I can't
right.
say it either.
Yeah, good point. A word and always Microsoft Word always autocorrects it for me. That's right. I don't have a voice autocorrect here. But so you get the comparison almost through like their high school. Joe Senior did this in high school, Cinder tracks, not FAT timing, things like that. Joe Junior, interesting. How far, you mentioned about training and shoes and things like that, and facilities. How far do you take this story? Do you talk at all about college recruiting in this?
A little bit. I wrote so much. I remember I talked with a woman who did my editing, and she said, "How many words do you have?" And I said, 250,000. Just a number, maybe to you too, I don't know. I said, "Is that a lot?" She said, "Oh my God, if that was a book, it'd be 800 pages. And I said, "Well, that's kind of long." So she said, "You need to make this 2 books." So I made it 2 books.
Oh.
So the first one is a golden era, because I'm comparing the eras, and I want to say, well, which is the golden era? There isn't one. It's like, was Jim Ryan a big runner? Yes, he was. Is Alan Webb a big runner? Yes, he is. So it's hard to say if Galen Rupp is better than Frank Shorter. Faster, but is he better? Because and then I go through the some of the careers of the athletes just bounce. And so I usually go between cross country seasons, and then I go between indoor seasons, then between outdoor seasons, and between summer. So it's like there's 4. You bounce back and forth between one and the other. But for example, in high school, we didn't have indoor meets. There was no such thing. So the kids now, they talk about having an indoor season. We didn't have anything. We just trained on our own. So to say you had computerized training and I had nothing, well, that's the reason why you're better than I was, because inherently, there's differences. But I enjoy reading some of the past things. People that were great athletes. I remember Mike Durkin, for example, was an Olympian in 76, maybe 82, but they didn't go. He was, as a freshman, he was good, but not that great. But he got way better. He was a good miler, but he wasn't a good cross-country runner. But he got way better. So it's interesting to follow the 2 careers and see how they go along. But I use the backdrop for the father of the Vietnam War, because some of the political turmoil that's going on now was the same political turmoil that went on then. So it's very, very similar. And I used for the son, the technology is amazing. I compared it to the Gutenberg press. It's like to have a computer you just can't imagine what differences is made. And I think that's part of what I try and point out in the book. You have advantages that we never had. You could look up times anytime. Like we could only find times in Track and Field News and the Sunday Des Moines Register. That's the only place you could find them. So there was nothing else to find them at all. So I want to show the differences, and I think it shows what a great impact ultimately track and field and cross country had on athletes. And we talked about that earlier. It doesn't seem like it's that much, but it's cross country and track really are the only sports where everyone plays, everyone practices. They do this exact same thing. And there's not another sport that, like, even in swimming, which in theory is the same, it's so crowded. it's different. It's like the Loyola track running around 12 and a half laps, and you've got 125 yards worth of runners all the way around. And I think it's a unique sport. And I really want to sell the sport to parents and to show them, like, this is what it created. A kid who, the father was a kid who was like me, not good at football, not good in basketball, not good in baseball, but he could be a runner because he knew what hard work was. And that's all it takes, is a work ethic. And I think that's important.
The title of the book is called A Tale of Two Runners.
Golden Era, A Tale of Two Runners, yes.
Golden Era, A Tale of Two Runners. And so, and there's two, so like part 1, part 2, volume 1, volume 2?
The second book is A Long Road Ahead. I've written it, but I'm revising it right now.
Oh, okay.
So that'll be down the road.
Well, yeah, talk to us about, writing a book seems easy, right? It's like you have ideas in your head, or maybe if you're writing a biography or an autobiography, you think, oh, well, I've lived it, so I should just be able to set up my laptop and just go. Talk to us about the process. Like how long did it take from not only the first nugget of like, hey, I think there's like a book here, when you first started writing to publishing? Take us through the steps, because I know I said it seems easy, but I know it's not.
No,
easy.
You're right. Yeah, but it's like running a marathon. It seems like, oh, I could do that, but it's hard. And I would describe it as a marathon. That's how, like I said, I started 5 years ago, and it's just to grind it out day. It's like a habit, like being a runner. It's like anything else. You just do it. There's some days I write for 20 minutes and I can't take it anymore. And other days, there are days that I've worked 5 and 6 hours straight easily. And I literally don't know the time's gone. But it takes a long time to craft a sentence so it sounds good, so it sounds authentic, because all of us have heard people say, what's the final score of your game when they're talking about a cross-country meet? Well, they don't know what they're talking about, obviously, and so you turn them off. You need someone who understands the gut-wrenching feeling of 300 meters to go in a mile, like, I'm dead. I don't know if I can make it, type of thing. Or to be nudged by this much in a race, it's like, I don't want to say the words you're thinking in your head, but we all know what you're thinking. It's like, it's gut-wrenching. And so to know what it's like to run by yourself through the cornfield, through the farmland of Iowa, and cows here's what cows do. They watch you as you run by. And that's your excitement as you go along. Or a farmer waves to you like with one finger, that's as exciting as it gets, but that's the reality of it is. And so, I've been there. I understand, like when you describe stuff, I know what it feels like and how frustrating it is, and how fleeting a successful moment is. But I also understand how when you win something like a mile or a cross-country race, a split second after the race, you're not tired. You should be exhausted, but you're so elated. It's like you feel no fatigue. That sensation is something that few people understand. And so that's what's driven me, but it's a slow process. Some days I'd write 1 page, some days I'd write 10 pages. And I knew nothing about what I was doing. I'm a decent writer, but you have to, I can't say he's an old man, 68. I have to say his mustache showed a lot of years on his body. You have to be creative about how you describe things. And that's what I've learned to do. And I wake up many times at 3 in the morning, and I have a diary I still keep. And I'll write stuff in the diary at night, and I'll use it in my story the next morning, because it gets your brain into a thought pattern that you end up doing a lot. But I had no experience writing a book. And so I think if you took 100 people who want to write a book, only one person will. I'm not saying I'm exceptional. I'm just persistent. And that's how I got it done. But it takes, you can self-publish, which I did. There's good and bad. You make more money off it, but you make more mistakes off it, which it can happen. But you've got to have people who edit your stuff, and that's expensive. There's a lot more expenses. Like if I've spent probably close to $4,000 already on my book. Now, I'm sure I'll make it back, because I'm a hustler. You have to market your book. And you know what it's like. You have to market Gill. That's how you get things. So they aren't going to come to you and say, gosh, you got good products. I think I'll use my whole track will be in Gill stuff. No, you got to sell your stuff. And so that's what I do. And I think people have good ideas. There's so many stages of success. It's like, you can't just be a good coach or a good writer. You have to be a good salesman. You have to be, those are things. And that's what I discovered. And even now, like I could, yesterday, I spent 5 hours putting email addresses from college coaches around the nation in my database so that when I want to send them something, so 5 hours, think about that, just typing in, looking up, typing in email address. And you know what that's like. You just have to put catalogs, emails. I mean, there's a million things you have to do. And your goal can never, the thing I always say too, your goal can never be to make money. Your goal is to write a good book and sell it. That's all your goal is. Because I think a coach, honestly, if they just said, I want to maximize all my athletes, that's my goal. If I win a national title, then I'm doing a good job. And that's what you're trying to look at the product and not the the process, not the end product.
Yeah, it's about the process, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's exactly what I do.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about, running those Iowa cornfields and your only audience, it's boring. It's all corn colored, and maybe your excitement is there's a cow and he looks at you, or the farmer waves at you. The skill set though is, how do you describe that scene right there, interestingly enough, that people would want to read it, right? And so what that is, it's about bringing value. What value can I bring? I was not a distance runner at all. In fact, and I am a voracious reader. However, I'm a voracious nonfiction reader, right? I think there's enough crazy stuff in the world. I'm like, I don't need to read Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and all that kind of good stuff. However, I do remember 20 plus years ago, reading Once a Runner. Yeah, I'm a track geek, so I was like, well, hey, this book I hear about, I have to read it, right? And I can still remember the scenes that John L. Parker painted, if you will, about the I think it was quarter mile repeat. I mean, it was a repeat. I don't remember if it was quarters
like 40 or something.
Yeah, an ungodly number. And you brought up, Prefontaine sock, and it made me remember, like, oh, there was a scene in that book where he talked about the blisters and the bleeding in the sock, and you can. Like, I don't know, did they ever make Once a Runner into a movie or a show or anything? Okay, so I've never seen the scenes except for right here in my head, and he did such a good job. So to take, I love the idea of this story. You have to have a good subject, right? It can't just be my subject's going to be track. Well, get in line. There's a million books about track, good ones, bad ones. But the idea of, because we're always comparing, right? What's the big comparison right now in basketball? Jordan and LeBron.
Exactly.
And there is no comparison, right? It's like, oh, they're just different. Jordan was who he was because of X, Y, and Z. And if you saw the Netflix special, which I thought was awesome,
that was good.
Yeah, I was in Chicago during that time period, so it was brought back a lot of memories and emotions. And then LeBron, who I'm not a basketball fan, so I don't know that I've seen 20 minutes of LeBron playing. But I know he's friggin' awesome. But it's like they didn't play in the same system at the same time, and even if they did, different positions, different games, etc., different time frames. So I love this idea because we have it in track. The old guard ran this. The new guys and gals run this, but we've got all these tracks. We've got all this equipment. We've got fiberglass and carbon vaulting poles. Well, they did this on steel and bamboo, and it's like, oh, they're both generations are awesome. They're just different. So there, I think, is the uniqueness in the story. And when I found the story, what immediately attracted me to it, the subject of it was, oh, here are two similar, they're distance runners, they're father and son doing the same activities, just in majorly different time frames, and so they've got different concerns and advantages and disadvantages, etc.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I love this storyline, man. So how did you? This might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So how did you come up with the title of it as you were writing it? Again, I know that's kind of a dumb question, but I'm gonna let you answer it anyway.
No, but it's hard because you think of a lot of I mean, it was comparison of errors. That was behind my story. So I thought, okay, and I thought at one time the golden era, but it's like, but I don't want there to be the golden. I want a golden era. So it's like, it could be this one, could be this one, and that's what I wanted to do. And I think it's because I'm so old. You know, you won't like to compare. And I hear kids all the time say, well, Alan Webb ran 3:53. It's like, yeah, but Jim Ryan ran in 1966, maybe he ran 3:55. So it's, you know, it's like he broke as a junior in high school, he broke 4 minutes a mile. I mean, you know, when I see Donald Sage, who ran at York, great runner, he's a fictional character in my book. Because what I do is I use, like, do I use Prefontaine all the time? Do I use Jim Ryan all the time? But there's also athletes like, in my book, it's Daniel Page, and his name is Donald Sage. I checked with him to see if that was okay, because I don't say anything untoward. It's all, you know, clean stuff. And so but it makes the story interesting because you're using real events. You know, like the coach at Michigan, I don't know if you know Ronnie Warhurst. He used to coach at Michigan. It's Ronnie Hurst in the book. So because he's a colorful character, I'll put it that way. So I use colorful lines, but I didn't want to actually say that he said that because he didn't. And so those are the people that, if they have a line, then I make them fictional. But I like it because it's real events that happened. I mean, Craig Virgin, did I run against Craig Virgin? Many, many times. Again, I only saw the back of his head. So that type of thing is good. But it's been a fun process. I enjoyed it as much as coaching. I can honestly say that.
Is that right?
It's a worthy activity and keeps me in trouble.
Yeah. Hey, that's exciting, man. I love, you know, to me, life is all about value. In the private sector, you know, when we're looking at new equipment or what equipment and all that kind of stuff, it's about, well, what value can we bring in that equipment that someone's going to be willing to pay for it, right? I mean, it has to be paid for so we can keep our people employed and keep doing this year after year and serving coaches year after year. So when you're writing a book, it's the same thing. It's like, well, what value can I give? And I just love, like, I almost see it as a movie, a 1 hour TV show, you know, one off of this back and forth. Like, and almost like, you know, to really like, sell the difference of, you know, like black and white on when you're showing the senior and the, you know, colored when you're showing the junior.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that would just be, I love this. I can't wait to get a hold of a copy and read this, even as a fiction story, because you have enough nonfiction in there. I think I'll be okay.
No, you will.
Well, where can,
I mean, you'll like it. It's a good story.
Awesome. Where can we go if someone's interested in purchasing a copy of the book? Where might they go to get their own copy?
Well, if you go to 3 W's and a dot and then Tale of Two Runners, taleoftworunners.com. It'll be on my webpage, and it's the ebook is out now. The print copy will be out about mid-October. One of the issues I had with first time, but it'll get out there. And I've had a lot of athletes. Probably in 1 week, I probably sold over 50 copies. So I'm sure I'll get a lot more.
Yeah, I'm a paper guy. I've tried reading. I'm an iPad guy. I mean, I have iPad, but I can't read on the iPad, stuff like that. I still like it. Part of it's tactile, I think, but I love that book. Love the smell of the pages from the library. I'm a big library guy, but I just love that.
No, I've got 2 books on the table right here.
Well, A Tale of Two Runners, A Tale of Two Runners.com or Tale?
Yeah, you're right. Tale of Two, just
Tale
of Two Runners.com.
Tale of Two Runners, all spelled out. .com. Go check it out. I think I think it'll bring value to you. And you know what? Maybe you need some escapism right now from what's going on out there and not being able to go to meets and things like that right now, unfortunately. But we're going to get back, which is the great thing. But I think I also think of, you know, books like this and Once a Runner, but definitely a book like this, A Tale of Two Runners. What a great book for like a senior gift. kind of a, thank you for what you've been for our program here at the high school level and college
Exactly.
level. What a great gift. And always Christmas is around the corner. So, if you need your Christmas gift, taleoftworunners.com. That's the place to go. Jim, thanks so much for being here today. I love,
You bet.
after talking to Bob, and I called him the, Chicago through and through guy, I feel like you are the adopted Chicago guy
Yeah.
through and through, an Iowa City born and Iowa alum. But having coached at so many great schools, I did not know about Northwestern. I love that, but Northwestern, Loyola, UIC. I just love that you're in our neck of the woods and giving value to people, and just so happy that you would join us today and share that journey with us.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I was glad to. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for joining us here on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. Stay tuned for another great coach. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.